Good morning and happy Sunday. Pull us all up here, get everybody in the room. And hi, let's start seated. That looks pretty good. Focus on lateral balance today. So making sure that we feel balanced left to right. And that's obviously going to come from a balanced sacral connection. And once you feel physically aligned, let's start to soften the breath. And my reminder on that is always to not just soften the inhale and the exhale portion of the breath, but really focus on smoothing out the transitions between the inhale and the exhale, and the exhale and the inhale. We'll give ourselves about 60 more seconds here. Balancing the physicality of the lateral edges so the weight distribution is equal, even. And moving into and out of the transitions of our breath. And with your next inhale, let's bring our hands together at heart center. Eyes can open if they're closed, and then we'll just interlace the fingers here. So we end up with a nice strong interlace, palms of the hands together, heels of the hands together. And utilize your next inhale breath to take the arms up and overhead. For a lot of us, this is a pretty strenuous shoulder activity just without any warm up, right? So be gentle. Remember that the elbows can bend as much as need be. And then we're going to go right into another pretty strenuous thoracic spine adjustment. So we're going to lean over towards the right. But this is a big ask. So make sure you're not overextending. The shoulder extension makes the thoracic spine have to work even harder because it's pulling that posterior musculature. So make sure your arms are in an appropriate place and the lean itself is in an appropriate place. And then we'll come back to neutral. And we'll do the same thing to that second side, left side. Big, huge thoracic spine mobilization. And we'll come right back to neutral, and then we'll walk ourselves out into a fold. Settle here. Trying to create space in that upper back. Lower back is going to receive a lot of space. Try to create some space in the upper back. Yeah, nice, Kaylee. Let's walk ourselves back up to vertical. And as we come to vertical, shoulders get broad. Let the palms roll up towards the ceiling and rest them on your thighs and just squeeze the shoulder blades back. A shoulder blade squeeze back. We'll really testing our anterior neutrality capacity. We don't want to bow out at all. So we're squeezing back, but maintaining that front of body neutrality. And then drop your chin to your sternum with an exhale. And as the chin drops, there's a little bit more room for the shoulder blades to squeeze back without that anterior collapse. And relax back to neutral. And as you relax back to neutral, notice how your body kind of expands, almost like a sponge that's been compressed. So we get that space and just try to hold that without a lot of musculature pull or squeeze. So we expand and we're just going to maintain that expansion as we transition to hands and knees tabletop. So as you come into tabletop, right, we change the orientation of the torso, and finding that length can be a little bit of a challenge. So give yourself a moment to just play with the belly positioning until you feel that expansiveness in the torso. And then we're going to play as we curl our toes and lift our seat back into down dog in kind of that same delicate balance. So the balance here is creating length without the full expression of our musculature. Generally, I'm winding up musculature and we're creating length. Here, I want you to ease into the length. And then we'll come back down to hands and knees, flip the tops of the feet, and sink back and into child's pose. And so if you're in class last week, right, we worked on manually lengthening the spine by pressing into the hands and pushing the tailbone back in child's pose. We have that option here, but see what you can do without fully involving the musculature here. See what you can do on the exhale portion, on the release portion of the practice to elongate. And then we'll feel our fingertips grip into the mat in front of us. Inhale, pull ourselves forward to hands and knees, tabletop. From tabletop, curl your toes, lift your seat, roll back into down dog. Finding the space through the softness, and we'll walk ourselves forward into fold. In the fold, inhale into half lift. Exhale back into your fold. Let your head go, let your spine get long. Soften here. Gently bend into the knees so that there's a little bit more softness than you might normally have in your legs. And then drift your awareness to your sacrum. And we're going to roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae, stacking the whole way. As we come into mountain, right, the shape itself has that strong sensation to it. There's glute activation, there's quad activation, there's torso activation. Take the torso activation as your point of emphasis. So lock in the core, lock in the shoulders, feel the upper body strength, and then soften the lower body. So we take like a 5% softness in the lower body. Oftentimes what's going to happen is we're going to lose the lower abdominal band. Our belly's going to tilt forward and the low back's going to compress. We want to make sure we have enough upper body strength here so that doesn't happen. So we're finding that anterior neutrality while we have some softness, some delicateness in the lower body. And then keep the delicateness in the lower body, keep the strength in the upper body as you sweep the arms up and go through fold. Upper body stays strong, lower body is just relaxing. And find that little bit of additional space. The additional space comes from the lower body, but it transitions into that torso. So as you're folding, let the head completely go. Let your body completely relax into that shape. Yes, beautiful. And then drift your awareness back to your sacrum. And we're going to roll ourselves back up, utilizing your traditional roll, right? The strength in the legs, strength in the torso, all the way back into our traditional mountain. So we reestablish leg strength. And this time, we're gonna keep the glute squeeze, keep the quad squeeze, keep the calves, keep the toes all active, and then soften the upper body. At the same time, we don't want that anterior collapse where we just soften and hang. So we need enough glute squeeze so that the spinal column stack can just stay here. And then just try to turn the upper body into jello. And without lifting the hands, because we're not even gonna use that much musculature, we're just gonna start to tilt forward. And the upper body is just gonna kind of unfold into this length and settle into that depth. And what you'll notice is the length ends up manifesting more in the lower body. So we feel this more in the legs here as the upper body just kind of melts into this space. Give yourself that opportunity. Let gravity play with the torso and pull you down. And as the torso is pulled down, let the posterior chain of the legs elongate. And then when you feel like you've created maximum elongation, the hands touch the mat. And without losing that length, walk yourself or slide yourself back into down dog. So that as you land in down dog, you have the upper leg posterior chain length, right? So hamstrings have some space. The calves may still feel really restricted. And if that's the case, bend the knees and or soften the foot placement until the calves relax. And then let's come down to hands and knees. We'll flip the tops of the feet and sink back and into child's pose. We'll just give ourselves a little bit of time to meld the length creation between active and passive elongation. So you know those tools for active elongation, it's core squeeze, it's hand pressure. Passive elongation, you know those tools as well, right? It's the relaxation, the softening of the physical form around the scaffolding of the bone structure. So there's this seeker who is constantly pursuing betterment. Of course, that path has led to yoga. And the yogic path has led to this specific yogi that he feels very attached to. This woman who has been teaching and practicing for years and years and years. And he just feels like she has the answers. Last 30 seconds here in this child's pose as you meld passive and active expansion. Well, when you feel right, when you feel ready, fingertips grip into the mat in front of you. We'll inhale, pull ourselves forward to hands and knees, tabletop. We're gonna make our way back into down dog. So a little bit more activity than we might normally have in a recharge class here. Come up onto your tiptoes and then activate the leg strength here and keep the legs locked out. So we'll slide the legs forward without bending the knees. And then we get at the front of the mat, we're generally on our tiptoes, right? Because we're likely not walking on our heels when we have the legs straight from that down dog. So release the heels, and as the heels release, balance the weight between the toe mounds and the heels, and then roll yourself up through flexion in the mountain. And in mountain, we're gonna activate everything like we normally do. So it's glute squeeze, quad squeeze, calf squeeze, core squeeze, shoulder activation, cervical spine activation, and then keep all of that strength turned on, and we'll sweep our arms up. Arms stay active and strong as you keep the rigidity through the musculature and take yourself through forward fold. And in the bottom of that fold, at the end of that fold, you release and relax, right? That's more of our traditional forward fold. And you can feel how there's length available to you there. Now we start to feel that high calf musculature start to elongate. We start to work into that place where we felt restriction. Drift your awareness back to your sacrum, and let's roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae all the way back and into mountain. And now we're going to take a soft mountain. Now, this requires an awful lot of awareness because we have to keep the spinal column stacked so we don't go belly forward. So we're just going to create the stack, relax the legs, relax the upper body, keep the length though. So we have just that edge of activation, just enough to keep us long and neutral. We're not going to sweep the arms up. We're going to think about softness through the entire body as you slowly start to fold. You can even unwind the reverse roll up if you want, or you can just go through a more traditional torso alignment and fold, but think about softness the whole way down. So if you get to a point and you feel some pull, see if you can pause and ease through that. I know we generally land at the bottom of this fold with an awful lot of fold space. Plus, we don't have a lot of the general restrictiveness in the musculature. Just breathe here and focus on that exhale portion. And anytime musculature starts to activate and pull and restrict, just see what you can do to relax that. And then feel the toes activate. And then feel the whole foot placement activate. The calves activate, the hamstrings activate, lumbar activates, torso active, arms active. And now some of that restrictiveness creeps back in, right? Now we feel the posterior chain being pulled. Soften back with your exhale and see if you can deactivate everything that has activated, that has pulled, that has started to create shortness in the chain as you sink back into this fold. Remember that toes matter, that toe mounds matter. Every bit of musculature can pull on that chain and shorten what we have available. And then plant your hands. We'll walk back into down dog. This will be the last down dog of class this morning. So we pedal here, we wag here, we do whatever we need to do to maximize our length. And then when you're ready, when you're right, we'll come down to hands and knees and we'll sink back into what'll be our last child's pose. Okay, as we settle in child's pose, I want you to bring the concentration of your awareness on your sacrum and think about if there is any tilt, if there is any offset, if there is any adjustment in the placement of your sacrum. And how you can create more balance there. Then with the idea of our sacrum being balanced as the primary focus, slide your right hand on top of your left. So as the right hand comes over, you get lateral edge pull. And as the lateral edge of the right side gets pulled, it wants to lift the right side of the sacrum. We want to have a little pelvic bowl tilt. So with our focus, we're finding our way back to neutral there. And then slide your right hand back to its appropriate side. Inhale, pull yourself forward to hands and knees, tabletop. This is just a reset, a transitionary tabletop. Think back into child's pose when you're ready. As you land, once again, think about finding balance. Now the right side has a little bit more freedom, so the left side wants to tilt up already. So we need to compensate there already before we even take the hand slide. So when you feel balance, left hand comes over on top of the right. We get that lateral edge pull now on the left side. The left side of the pelvic bowl wants to tilt up. We bring just enough activity in that glute space, in that hip space, in that trunk space to settle the pelvic bowl back to neutral. And then when you feel balance left to right, hands come back to their side of the mat. We are balanced down the middle of the body. We'll inhale and pull ourselves forward, hands and knees tabletop, and sweep our legs in front of us so we end up in stack. Spine tall. Thinking about the sacral reset against the mat here. And softening into the torso without collapsing forward. So we get the torso as soft as it can be. Obviously, legs may have, depending on your flexibility, right, of the posterior chain, you may have a little bit of pull there. If you do, just bend the knees enough till that alleviates. And then we're going to take a soft forward fold from seat. As you get into the places of restrictiveness, wherever that is, think about relaxing. If the restrictiveness is in the legs, bend the knees more. If the restrictiveness is in the torso, soften through the breath and soften through that energetic awareness. And the more we soften our torso, right, the more flexion happens in the spine, the more the posterior chain gets pulled. So it seems counterintuitive that we can soften our way out of this sensation. As you get into what feels like it is the fully encompassed embodiment of this shape, start to elongate and slow down the duration of your breath. And as the breath starts to slow down, notice how the physicality of the body responds to your respiratory rate. Remember that if the shortness is in the legs, the solution there is knees bend. If the shortness, the stiffness, the restrictiveness is in the torso, we are slowing the duration of our breath. And we'll give ourselves about 30 more seconds here. And when you're ready, we'll slowly bring ourselves back up to vertical. Just make sure you have that blanket or towel handy. And then we're going to head right onto our back to appreciate the amount of work that we have just done. And as you settle here, legs can be bent, legs can be extended, bottoms of the feet can be together. Hands can be at cactus, they can be on your sternum, they can be at T, whatever feels appropriate for you here. Settle into that. Oh, we want to get back to the sensation of neutrality left to right. So sacrum is balanced, shoulder girdle is balanced, hip girdle balanced, shoulder girdle balanced, and that is our emphasis here. Last 10 seconds here, just settling in. And as you're ready, as you're right, we'll bring our knees to a bent position if they're not already there. And take your emphasis, take your awareness and drift it to your sacrum and your shoulder girdle. So that is where you're focusing on. We're going to add movement, but I want you to stay focused there. The connection stays equal even as we move. We'll take our left ankle across our right thigh. So we end up in a figure four. Now, depending on your hip openness, right away, your sacrum could have peeled away from the mat. If that is the case, you are perfectly set within the shape you're in. If the sacrum is still fully connected, the shoulders are still fully connected, you can slide your hands behind your right thigh and interlace the fingers. Now, for most of us, the moment we do that, the sacrum peels away from the ground. You can see underneath me, sacrum is lifted. That is a breaking of our connection. So that means I need to slide the hands to the edge of my thigh. You can grab pants, you can just hang on to the musculature itself, but we need to have the sacrum planted here. So the fingers may not be able to interlace. Once you feel connected in that sacral space, if you're on the ground and if you don't have the leg wrap, stay exactly where you are. You're going to get everything we need. If you have the hands pulled, then we can slide that right foot up towards the ceiling. And as you do that, because of the way sacrum has to stay connected, right? Sacrum has to stay connected. As long as the sacrum is connected, any imbalance that we have in the musculature supporting the sacrum is going to be exposed. So if we have this left side imbalance, that left side pull, we're going to start to feel that. Generally, when we're thinking about this figure four shape, it's all about the external rotation of the hip. That's not what we're using this shape for today. We're using this shape as a way to expose imbalance of the supportive tissue around the sacral bone, the sacral connection itself. When you feel like you've had enough, you can release that right foot. As the right foot touches down, you can drop the left to mirror. And we just stay right within our body here. So now we have, if we had some imbalance, as we come back, we're gonna have a harder time balancing the weight distribution across the hips. And if we have a hard time balancing the weight distribution across the hips, we're gonna likely have a similar imbalance in the shoulders. So take a moment to find your way back to an equilibrium of balance. And so this man approaches this yogic teacher, and he's talking to her about how he's not feeling fulfilled and how that lack of fulfillment is causing him to seek. And she asked the question about, like, what do you feel like you're missing? When you're right, when you feel balanced, when you feel ready. With the awareness on sacral balance, we'll take the right ankle across the left thigh. Again, if you feel the sacrum pull up and lift, you're already there. You don't need to do anything. If you feel like you still are able to maintain that balance, we can slide the hands either behind the leg, as long as the shoulders and sacrum can stay connected, or to that edge where you can grab either pant material or the musculature itself as you extend the left leg, bottom of the foot, towards the ceiling. And again, we're feeling into that posterior chain and exposing imbalance in our musculature. It is a very different figure 4 than I've ever taught before. And most likely than you've ever been asked to get into before. So try to let go of past figure 4 experiences. And then as you feel right, when you feel balanced left to right duration wise, maybe musculature wise, we can release that left foot if it's lifted, and the right foot can come back to its side of the mat to mirror. And now we have a different sacral connection. So we've lengthened in balance here and we can be more at ease. Give yourself about 30 more seconds just to settle into this once again. And when you feel right, when you feel ready, let's take, so knees bent if they're not already, take your awareness right back to your sacrum and let your knees fall out wide, bottoms of the feet come together. Note how the sacrum responds to this. There is an almost 100% certainty that we will have more external rotation on one side and less external rotation on the opposite side, which means there's going to be almost a 100% certainty that we have some imbalance in this openness, and that as the imbalance will try to lift the less open side of our sacrum. So as you get into the full approximation of this shape, think about how we can adjust. It might be tilting 1% of our energetic weight towards the less open side so that we feel that perfect symmetry across our sacrum. It's also very possible, right? We've been in this shape 1,000 times, maybe more than 1,000 times. Generally, this is a medial line attack, right? We feel that expansiveness as we open. Here, you may feel the musculature around the sacrum in a completely different way. See if you can relax into that by that jello expression, that soft expansion. Last 10 seconds here. And when you're right, the knees come back up to neutral, feet come flat to the ground. Let's grab our blanket or towel. We're gonna take that from a shelf fold to a hot dog fold. So we end up with a nice long rectangle with some relative stable density. And we'll just have that in hand. We press ourselves up into a bridge high enough to get our blanket prop underneath us. And then we're gonna pull that up to the shoulder blades. So we want the blanket underneath kind of the middle and lower back. And then we'll release down so that the sacrum can connect to the mat once again. So now we have a forced extension of the belly, right? Forced extension of the lumbar spine. Encouraged extension? I don't know. One of those. It's forced and encouraged, I think. It's encouraged and forced. The sacrum, though, is coming back to balance, to stability, to ease. And because we have this encouraged, forced lumbar extension, we now have a different integration between the lumbar and the sacrum. We've been working from neutral. We've been focusing on neutral, not only laterally, right, but also through that stack itself. Now we have a different integration. The key is to make sure that the top of the sacrum can release down. So we're thinking about relaxing into the musculature around the scaffolding that is our bone structure, so that the pelvic bowl tilt that has the belt line up is softening down. And we're trying to create just a little bit of space between the lumbar and the sacrum itself. And we can only do that if we relax that musculature. So just a real quick touch on anatomy, and then we'll get back into this story. But I think this is important because there are a couple of places in our body where there is a lot of complexity. And that complexity is protected by essentially a layer of armor, which is our bone structure, right? So you can think of our rib cage, the entire thoracic area is protected by a sheet of plate of armor. And I was talking to a doctor on the podcast about pain, and he was talking about how that's the area where we have the most movement. And in some ways, it's true, right? Like the heart musculature is moving, the lungs are moving all the time. There's a lot of movement there, but there's also an immense amount of restrictiveness, and it's an intentional restrictiveness. When you think about the hips, pretty similar situation, right? There's this big sheet of huge, dense bones that connect the upper and lower body. And part of that is because we need a hinge that can absorb the amount of movement we're going to do. So when you think about the sacrum and the hip connection, the sacrum and the lumbar connection, it's three kind of corresponding hinges, right? But they're protected by this massive amount of musculature, the density of the sacrum, the density of the hips, the ilium, of the femur, of the femoral head, about as big as our bone structure gets. So as you're here, you really need to focus on the exhale, softening that musculature that is clamped down to support this massive amount of bone density so that you can get back to neutral. We're going to give ourselves about 60 more seconds here to just focus on that. So this yogi had asked this man, what he feels like he's missing. And he says, well, I see people around the world, around my world, around my experience that are enjoying life to its fullest. And she pauses and she waits for him to finish, but he's done. She's like, okay, well, where are you seeing that? And he says, anywhere. And she's like, well, give me an example. Where have you seen that? And he says, well, I was at the park the other day and I saw this family and they were just like bundles of joy. And she says, okay, but where did you see that? He says, I told you, at the park. And he's like, okay, well, it was at the park on Val Vista. And she's like, no, 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 no. Where did you see that? When you are right, when you are ready, let's bring our knees back into a bent position. Push down to the toe mounds and the heels. Lift your belt line up and slide that prop out from underneath you. We'll set that to the side for the moment. And then just come back down, and we reestablish neutrality now through that joint connection. And then when you're right, we're going to extend the legs down the mat. So the legs are straight, toes are pointed towards the ceiling. Bring your right hand to the middle of your sternum and stack your left hand on top of that. And then anchor your body from your sacrum without arching into the lumbar back. So now you know the sensation of lumbar arch. We're going to maintain neutrality and walk both feet over to the left corner of your mat or maybe beyond. From the belt line up, your body is staying perfectly neutral. The right hand is connected to the sternum. The left hand is pressed on top of that. The shoulders are perfectly pointed straight towards the ceiling. And the lower half down, we have that little offset. Most of us are going to feel this on that right lateral edge of our hip musculature. Remember, I should have reminded you this from the start, but as you get here, the sacrum is still completely neutral. Even though the hips are offset, even though the lower half of the body is offset, the sacrum weight is completely neutral. And we'll walk back to neutral. And as you come back here, almost that same sensation of the sponge expanding, right? We create length by easing into this new space. And then we'll switch hand placement. So left hand to the sternum, right hand stacks on top, and we'll walk to the right side of our mat. Again, keeping the sacrum. You feel that left side hip flexor load, that femoral head load. And it's a subtle adjustment, right? But it's also deep and long. There's an awful lot of that musculature. It's a layer underneath the huge outer strap of quad tissue, and it's actually into the supportive hip musculature. And then when you feel balanced side to side, we walk back to neutral. We'll bring the knees into a bend position as the sacrum stays balanced. You're going to keep the blanket in the same hot dog fold that we had it in. Lift the belt line up and slide that underneath the sacrum this time. So we come into a supported bridge, but it is a barely supported bridge. Right, as we compress into that blanket or towel, we probably have no more than a half inch to an inch of lift. And that's all we're looking for. Now we have the opposite impact at the sacral hip lumbar joint. We have, instead of the lumbar trying to arch its way out, we are elevated in the hips, and the lumbar is pressing down towards more neutrality, or towards what we'd think is more neutrality if we had everything in alignment. Just ease into that. The bottoms of the feet can come together, knees can fall out wide. Just note if you do that, that brings the arch back into the spine. You have to work harder with core squeeze. So if you want to go into just a relaxation, a full relaxation, knees stay up or legs can be extended, and we just soften our breath until we can get that sacrum to align with our spinal column. And so he keeps offering these answers of like more and more specific on where he saw this family. And she keeps asking the same question. No, where did you see this family? And finally, he's like, well, I saw it with my eyes. It's like, okay. And where did the image of this family originate? And he says, the park. She says, no, the image of the family. And she finally gets him to come around to the idea that the family he saw in this perfect state of bliss was seen inside of him. And his eyes, the lenses received light. They saw it backwards and upside down, and his brain reversed the image. And his brain created this vision. And she says, do you have any other examples? And he says, okay, fine. When I hear you speak about life, I know that you have everything figured out. She says, okay, well, where did you hear me speak about life? And he says, well, in class. She says, no, where did you hear me speak about life? And he says, okay, my ears. She says, okay, but what did you hear? And he lists out these like specific examples he's heard this woman say. And she says, no, you heard me make a bunch of noises. Your brain translated those noises into meaning. We'll give ourselves 60 more seconds here. And they go back and forth a little bit. And she just is harping on this same idea, this creation within his brain. And he keeps saying, well, no, but you said the words. And so all of a sudden, she flips the switch and she repeats back to him this phrase, but she does it in German. Same words he just said, she does it in German. And he has no idea what she's saying. She explains, I just said what you told me in English, I said it in German. When you're ready, push down to the toe mounds, push down to the heels, lift your belt line up high enough to slide that blanket out. Now we'll release the tailbone back down to the mat. As the tailbone touches down to the mat, we rebalance our sacrum. We create that point of emphasis, which is balance across the hip girdle. And let your eyes close. Ask yourself if there's anything you might want or need before Shavasana. If there is, let's offer that to our body. If you are right, if you are ready, if you are in a place where you can drift into ease, feel free to do that. And so the two of them keep going back and forth, right? She keeps saying these things in other languages. She speaks all of these languages and she keeps repeating these phrases, and yet they have no meaning to him. And she says, it's not what I'm saying that's giving this meaning. It's what your brain is creating out of the noises I'm making. And that finally clicks in. And they go through just a couple more examples, things he's seen, things he's experienced, things he's heard. And she identifies that each one of those was a creation within him. And your body just completely and fully drift into a state of stillness. And so with great effort, and example after example after example after example, she finally gets him to admit that everything he sees, hears, touches, feels, experiences happens within him. We'll start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. Into our wrists and our ankles. Elbows, knees. Shoulders, hips, sacral awareness. Neck and head. Jaw, tongue, eyes. And eventually we'll allow enough movement into our body that we can transition from the shapes we are in back into a seat. And in the seated space, we'll once again find neutrality across our sacrum. And we'll inhale our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you ask yourself this question? If someone could show you that every single thing you're searching for exists within you, would you keep looking externally? And see how that changes your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Sunday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you. Thanks for being here. If you want to do this again, we'll be back next week to recharge, and tomorrow night we'll move around a little bit. Love you. See you soon. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Mwah.